protective controls on us is incredibly important, and preparing us, I guess, for that sense that it's going to get worse. And as Boris Johnson said a few weeks ago, that, more and more loved ones will be lost before their time.
Yeah, and Robert, writing to every house in the country, of course he did that televised address to the nation. Is this an effective means of communication, do you think?
I think it's just to keep up the momentum. This is what you do in a crisis. You have to keep a drumbeat of announcements to show that you're in charge. I think it's a way of him stating his presence. I completely follow Polly in where we are going. And what this is about is they're expecting the first big spike to come within about 10 days to a fortnight, to possibly as far away as 3 weeks, but sometime in April. Now, the hidden message behind this is get ready for this. We must be in good shape and not exhaust ourselves, because I've been on the story all week, as I'm sure both of you have been, and I've been talking to epidemiologists, to doctors, to people, heart surgeons, and they're expecting the next big bout to come in the summer. Because, and this is the message from Italy, which we can possibly discuss, is that this is a resurgent virus. It seems to come back in places where they think they're getting on top of it. And it's particularly happening in northern Italy and Lombardy at the moment.
Let's look at another story in the Telegraph, Polly, also on the front page. This is quite interesting that there was a kind of exercise carried out 4 years ago, a 3-day dry run for a pandemic that was carried out in October 2016. And one of the things it showed, apparently, was that the NHS really couldn't cope very well with a surge in cases in a pandemic.
Yeah, I think probably in the longer term, some really serious questions are going to have to be asked about our preparedness for this. We had a whole series of respiratory infections that kind of threatened to be a pandemic like this, whether it's SARS or avian flu or swine flu. And so in a way, this was quite a predictable event. People talk about the global financial crash as having been a black swan. Something that was unpredictable, unforeseeable. There are literal academic papers that said something like this could and probably would happen, that it would be a coronavirus from kind of a zootropic infection coming from animals, probably most likely from China. And if government was doing these exercises, which they do around a whole range of different kinds of planning, they did preparations for coalition building before 2010. Robert will know, I'm sure, of lots of defence exercises that are done. And those are supposed to raise serious questions. They're sort of almost supposed to go wrong, to find all of the worst case scenarios so that government can prepare. And if you remember, in preparation for Brexit, Matt Hancock said that he was spending more money on fridges than anybody else in the world. Well, if they'd done this preparation, why weren't they also spending more money on respirators and ventilators? It does seem that in the long term, we're going to have to do a proper public inquiry into preparedness. Yeah. And think about how we prepare ourselves for these kind of events in the future.
Robert, what's your view on this? Does there need to be, when all of this is over, quite a long way down the track, some sort of official public inquiry into whether or not we were prepared?
Yes. Shortly is the short answer to that. And I think the revelations, as Polly was hinting, are going to be pretty bloody. They're going to be pretty awful. Yes, they were warned. Actually, in a 2018 national security paper, Pandemic, I've got the writings about it in front of me now on my desk. They did understand the implications of it, and it's the ramifications not only for the National Health Service, but for other frontline responders and also the backup, including the volunteer services that we're now being called in to help and are needed really rather urgently. But the thing about pandemics is that they're just too difficult. They go into the too difficult box. And the problem is building up a quality which is known as resilience. It's an abstract noun. As I said, building up resilience, which you see in security document after security document, is about as bad and about as difficult as the global war on terror. You cannot battle or build up abstract nouns. And this is what's going on. But I'd just like to add something. There has been a series from the World Health Organization of studies called A World at Risk. They've been going on for 10 years now, and they come out every year. It's chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland, the first woman Prime Minister of Norway, and very expert on world health. And the latest one, now pin back your ears, there is a very real threat of a rapidly moving, highly lethal pandemic of a respiratory pathogen killing 50 to 80 million people and wiping out nearly 5% of the world's economy. That was in September last year. There have been warnings around. The fact is, as we're seeing with a lot of the resources that we will have to ramp up and bring to it, it's been a story ever since 2008 and the crash. It's been a story of austerity and hollowing out. We don't have the resources. We're going to have to get them.
OK. Polly, I'm afraid your picture's frozen, but we've got a kind of passport photo type picture of you, so we'll keep talking to you because we can hear you fine. Let's look at the Sunday Times. And of course, everyone who's in lockdown at the moment in the UK is wondering when it's going to end. And the Sunday Times story is that it's going to potentially go until June, according to Professor Neil Ferguson, who's one of the leading academics who's done a lot of modelling on this. And he is saying that we're going to have to keep these measures in place probably until the end of May, perhaps even early June. But May, he says, would be optimistic. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, the messaging is, and it's partly in that letter we were talking about that Boris Johnson is sending, is that if we obey these rules, they will be able to be lifted sooner. But I think, this doctor is reminding us that sooner isn't in fact soon. In both the UK and much more the US, we're seeing calls for restrictions to be kind of lifted as early as possible. Let's not kill the economy in trying to save lives. And I think here in the UK, it's much more likely that we will follow the scientific advice and keep those restrictions. It's a question of enabling people to remain patient. And not start to just defy the rules and I assume that it's all right if we start to, as the saying goes, flatten the curve, that means that we can release the restrictions. There have been kind of new projections that deaths might be much lower than have originally been forecast. Original forecast around 250,000 deaths in the UK, and now perhaps 5,000, perhaps 20,000. That's because of these restrictions. The challenge for the government from a communications perspective is teaching the British people who are not really accustomed to this kind of treatment by the police or by the authorities to bear with it for the sake of an enemy that remains invisible.
Yeah, and Robert, that's the point, isn't it? Bearing with it, and it's testing the patience of the British people. Obviously, what everybody wants to know, they're all keen to do their bit, but they also all want to know when it's going to be over, and that is pretty much impossible to say at the moment.
And that's where we come into the churn, don't we? I mean, that I've been having in a rather sort of dance macabre, glorious week of just going through the expertise of the experts. A, I'm not a doctor. B, I am not a statistician. And a statistician isn't like doing, the fantasy football and working out the odds on that. It's not betting. It's incredibly complex, this modelling, and the kind of modelling that Dominic Cummings seems to like, and according to his critics, actually gets wrong. The problem is that we have so many projections, as Polly was saying again, but they are very, very contradictory. And this is where I think the government got itself into a bit of a muddle, and it's getting itself out of it, I must say, because Boris Johnson is trying to do clear messaging. Remember the whole business about herd immunity, which actually also came from Professor Neil Ferguson, who has been absolutely wonderfully honest about when he has changed his mind about things. But now that they're working on, we must get the support of the people. It could be bad. Let's hope it's not going to be as bad as some of us fear it might be. And I think that is a very strong message. But, that what you get, I've been reading the last sort of 48 hours output of experts, and some say, well, of course, it's all been exaggerated, and it's a terrible plot. I do feel very, very concerned because of the multiplying effect that you get, and you get some really crazy stuff out there now in social media. I mean, the amount of fake news blowing around, even on my Twitter account, not from me, is just amazing.
So I think this guy's pretty sensible. He works for the Defence Department. He's seen these reports because they obviously affect the defence of the country. But also all the governments in the world have probably seen that WHO report. And I can only say that, any government that says that this virus was unforeseeable, they basically are lying, because exactly what this guy said, dealing with a pandemic is so difficult that they just put it in the too difficult to deal with box and forget it. And then when something like this happens, suddenly they're scrambling to try and put proper procedures into action, and they're unprepared. But of course they don't want to admit that they were warned about it, and they could have maybe have done something earlier. They hope that nobody gets to know this level of detail. But eventually, decent governments do eventually kick up the amount of activity they're putting into it, and hopefully they can reduce the death rate. I mean, it looks like it's working in most of the European countries, and even in America. But still, it's taken a long time for it to get through some people's heads that dealing with this, the strongest measures possible used, it's taken a long time for that to get into some people's heads who have the power to implement more serious stay safe in your houses, and don't gather in groups and stuff like that. But yeah, it's that guy said for 10 years the WHO has done a study sort of like covering the threat of pandemics, and no government can turn around and say that the information for them to take into consideration wasn't out there. They couldn't possibly have seen or foreseen this coming. They could have done something to prepare us. They could have had stores of ventilators. They could have kept larger stores of masks and gowns and gloves. In fact, in Germany, France used to have 1 billion paper masks for nurses and doctors in storage, and just a couple of years ago they got rid of it and decided that they would go with private companies keeping smaller stocks. They only needed, I think it was like 40 million a year, and they ran on the just-in-time sort of premise that you get with production in a lot of factories now, just in time. Order what we need for this month, and that's why we're in this situation now. We've used all those stocks up in 2 weeks, and now we're scrambling to get more masks and gowns and face visors. So yeah, the crap we hear from our government is supposed to be looking out for us. They care more about business and the economy. But we're going to lose a large part of the economy now anyway. Now what we're looking at is how much do they care about saving the population? Because that's what it comes down to. That's what the people who elect them and pay their taxes for are looking for. Protect us. Save as many people as possible. we will rebuild the economy. You can't bring somebody back for the dead. Anyway, I didn't make this video to be alarmist, but yeah, we have to realise that this virus, like lots of other viruses of its type, are resurgent, and the fact that we got over this first hump, we need to be looking to the future, knowing that this virus could come back like a month or so later in another spike. It's what they do, it's what the virologists know, and it's what they're trying to inform the governments about, and hopefully have the governments inform us that this might not be over in 2 or 3 weeks. We can probably expect it a few weeks after that to come back. Anyway, I'm just going to try and do the best for my family, my mum and dad and myself, and I hope that yous are doing the same for yous. Anyway, stay safe, people.